My son's bride raised her glass and called me the old fat hog we have to endure. The room laughed until her father realized the truth, that I was the man quietly owning the company his entire family depended on. I didn't shout, and I didn't break. I just smiled and decided right there in that golden wedding light exactly how their lives were about to change. Before I go on, let me thank you for being here with me. If you'd like to hear the rest of my story, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. At my age, knowing someone out there still cares to hear an old man's truth means more than I can put into words. It keeps me company in ways you might not imagine. I've lived alone for 18 years now. Some mornings, without thinking, I still set out 2 coffee cups, mine, and the one my wife Laura used to use. Then I catch myself, smile a little at the memory, and place hers gently back in the cupboard. Old rituals don't leave easily. Sometimes they're the last things that stay. My name is Daniel Mercer, and at 68 my body moves slower than my mind. My knees complain. My back groans at the smallest twist. But the sharpness in my thoughts, that part of me is never dulled. It's what helped me build a real estate portfolio, brick by brick, even after life tried to break me more than once. Most days start the same way. A quiet house, the hum of the fridge, a faint smell of wood polish from the night before, and on my desk, the same framed picture of Ethan at 6 years old, messy hair, missing tooth, holding a paper airplane like it was a ticket to some bigger world. I raised that boy alone after losing Laura. Worked late shifts, skipped meals to make sure he never had to. Sold my wedding band once so I could buy him the computer he swore would help him build things, just like Dad. And every time life forced me to choose between comfort and sacrifice, I chose sacrifice without thinking. When you love someone that deeply, you don't feel the weight of giving. You only feel the purpose. Ethan grew up fast. College. Grad school. Then a job that sparkled on paper but drained him in ways he never admitted out loud. Still, I supported him through every slip, every leap, every stumble. Quietly. Proudly. Never asking for anything in return except one thing, respect. And for many years I thought I had it. When he brought home Lily, I saw hope in his eyes again. She was polished, soft-spoken, graceful in the way people born into old money often are. The Whitmans, a family with social circles built over generations, the kind who shook hands with mayors and owned properties they rarely stepped inside. Ethan adored her. I saw it in the way he straightened his posture when she walked into the room. In the way he checked her face before finishing a sentence, looking for her approval like it was oxygen. "Dad," he told me one night, "she's the one." I nodded, smiled, tucked the ache behind that smile. When your children begin building their own lives, you don't lose them, but you do stop being their center. Then came the engagement. The ring, the venue, the kind of wedding that swells with so much expectation the price tag becomes a whisper you're afraid to say out loud. But Ethan asked, and when a child you've raised with your bare hands asks for a dream, you find a way. I had the resources, quiet investments, old buildings, long years of discipline, and yes, shares in Whitman & Co., Lily's family business. I'd started buying them decades ago, not for power, not to leverage anything, just because her grandfather once helped mine survive a recession. Old debts, old honor, old ties between 2 families who never actually spoke about them. No one knew, not the Whitmans, not Ethan, not anyone. I never bought those shares to gain control, but life has a way of shifting around truths you didn't expect to matter. With every check I signed for the wedding, I told myself the same thing. Let him have this, Daniel. Let your boy feel like the prince of the world for one day. I pictured him in his suit, straight, proud, glowing with the joy only young men believe will last forever. I pictured myself standing there, chest tight, eyes burning, watching him step into a new life. What I didn't picture, not in my darkest imagination, was being humiliated in front of 200 guests by the woman he loved. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. For now, the world was still soft and steady. A week before the wedding, I swept the porch, a habit Laura always teased me about. "You love tidy entrances," she'd say, "because life never gives tidy exits." She was right, more than she ever knew. The air was gentle that morning, the sky pale and kind, the neighborhood quiet, like a held breath. Ethan called that afternoon. His voice was warm, relaxed, full of the kind of happiness fathers pray their sons will someday feel. Just reminders about the suit, the pictures, the timing. Everything felt normal. If someone had tapped my shoulder right then and whispered, "Daniel, your piece is about to break," I would have chuckled and told them I was too old for riddles. But life had already begun shifting under my feet. I just couldn't feel it yet. Because the truth is, peace rarely comes to stay. And mine, the simple peace I had pieced together through work, love, and patient endurance, was reaching its quiet end. I didn't know it then, but that silence was the last real peace I'd feel for a long, long time. The wedding day should have felt warm, bright, full of promise. Instead, there was a tightness in the air I couldn't quite place. Something too smooth, too rehearsed, like everyone had practiced their smiles in the mirror except me. I arrived early, just as Ethan asked. Straightened my tie in the little side room near the chapel. Pressed my palm over my hair and whispered to myself, "All right now, stand tall today." A moment later, Ethan walked in, his suit crisp, his eyes shining with nerves and excitement. He hugged me quickly, almost too quickly, like something hurried him forward. "Dad," he said, "thank you. For everything." He said the words, but he didn't look me in the eyes when he said them. I noticed it. But like most fathers do, I let it go. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Soft music. Words that floated like feathers. Lily's dress catching the light. Ethan holding her hands with such tenderness, I felt my chest swell. For a brief moment, I believed the world was exactly how it should be. Then came the reception. Grand. Golden. The kind of room where even the tables looked expensive enough to lease. I found my seat quietly, sipped water, nodded politely at strangers who wore their wealth like perfume. The air hummed with celebration. And then Lily stepped onto the small stage with a champagne flute. A spotlight caught her face. Everyone turned. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice bright and sharp, "let me introduce you to the old fat hog we have to endure tonight." Her friends burst first, then cousins. Then a few drunk guests at the bar. Laughter. Loud. Careless. Bruising. My body froze before my thoughts did. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't even blink. My hand tightened around my glass, not out of anger. No, it was the kind of grip a man holds when reality hits so hard it has to land somewhere in the body. Then I heard whispers. Couldn't he have dressed better? Doesn't he know where he is? He looks completely out of place. Every sentence cut a little deeper. But the moment that changed everything, the exact moment, was the look on Charles Whitman's face. Lily's father. The man who had just allowed the joke. He turned toward me, and the color drained out of him as if someone had pulled the life straight from his veins. "That's Daniel Mercer," he whispered. "My new CEO." The laughter died mid-breath. Wine glasses froze in mid-air. People who had just laughed at me now stared like they'd insulted a king without knowing it. But Lily only frowned. "Dad? What's wrong?" Charles swallowed. "Honey, he's not just Ethan's father. He's my boss." The shock on her face lingered only a second, just long enough for me to see her pride crack. Ethan finally approached me, half smile stretched too tight. "Dad, she was just joking. She didn't mean anything." I turned toward him, looked into the eyes of the boy I raised, the man I supported, the son I sacrificed decades of my life for. He stood closer to her than to me. "She called me a hog," I said softly. He exhaled, frustrated. "Dad, don't make this bigger than it is." Not a single word of defense, not even the smallest gesture of loyalty. Just avoidance. I felt something shift inside my chest. A small, almost imperceptible snap. Not rage, not heartbreak, just the quiet sound of a boundary breaking after years of bending. Later, as the music slowed and guests drifted like shadows across the room, I overheard Lily telling her mother, "Why didn't anyone tell me he mattered?" Her mother whispered back, "Your father said Ethan's dad was ordinary." Ordinary. As if raising a son alone, paying for his education, funding his wedding, building a company from nothing, meant nothing. When Ethan found me by the door again, his voice was soft. "Dad, please don't hold this over us." I studied him, the young man I once carried on my shoulders, now shrinking before the weight of his own silence. "I'm not angry," I told him. And I wasn't. Not in the way he feared. "I'm just done pretending." He didn't understand the depth of those words. Not then. As I walked out of the reception hall, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel defeated. I felt clear, clearer than I had in years, and that's when I knew I would not stay silent. The morning after the wedding, the house felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe the cold had settled somewhere inside me during the night. I reached for 2 coffee cups the way I always do. Mine, and Laura's. But today my hand stopped halfway to the cupboard. The sight of her empty cup felt heavier than usual. I set it down quietly. The clink of porcelain on wood echoed through the kitchen like someone closing a chapter. I made a single cup of coffee and carried it to the table. The house sat around me in a stillness that felt almost physical. No clocks ticking loudly, no pipes humming, just that quiet, hollow kind of silence that knows something has broken. I replayed the laughter in my head, the insult, the smirk on Lily's face, the tremble in Charles's voice when he realized who I was, and Ethan, my son, standing, watching, saying nothing. That part stayed with me the longest. His silence. I sipped my coffee slowly. The warmth didn't reach my chest. It stopped somewhere near my throat, as if my body no longer knew what to do with comfort. Around noon, I opened the curtains to let in some light, but even the sunlight looked pale thin, like it didn't want to touch the room. I walked the familiar path through my home. Slow steps, quiet floors. Every corner held pieces of a life I had built with care. There, by the hallway arch, the faint pencil marks measuring Ethan's height year after year. In the living room, the worn spot on the sofa where Laura used to curl her feet beneath her. On the staircase, a small dent from the night Ethan ran downstairs too quickly and slipped. I'd carried him in my arms to the car, heart racing, terrified, whispering, "I've got you, buddy. I've got you." But now, walking through these memories, I felt something else. Distance. A soft, aching distance between what I gave and what I had become in their eyes. By mid-afternoon, I stepped outside to feel some air on my face. The breeze brushed past me gently, but even the wind felt different. Thinner, quieter. I sat on the front steps, hands folded, watching the empty street. Cars passed occasionally. A dog barked somewhere. A child's laughter echoed faintly 2 houses down. Normal sounds. But they didn't settle me like they used to. A neighbor walked by and gave me a nod. "Everything all right, Dan?" I forced a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." But inside, something was sinking. Not fast, not loud, just steadily. Because the truth I didn't want to say out loud was this. I wasn't hurt by strangers laughing at me. I wasn't hurt by the Whitmans' arrogance. I'd lived long enough to know pride when I saw it. What broke something inside me was realizing my own son didn't see me as someone worth defending. That's a kind of pain that doesn't explode. It settles. It nestles itself into your bones and stays there, humming quietly. As the day stretched, I wandered into my study. The air smelled like old paper and furniture polish. I sat at my desk and lifted the framed picture of Ethan again. 6 years old, gap-toothed grin, eyes full of trust only children carry. "What happened to us, kid?" The words came out low, shaky. Sometimes grief doesn't show through tears. Sometimes it shows through a whisper in an empty room. By evening, the shadows had grown long across the floor. I didn't turn on the lights, didn't cook, didn't distract myself. I let the weight settle exactly where it wanted. All the questions, all the memories, all the quiet disappointments that had piled up over time without me noticing their height. Laura's voice came back to me then, soft, warm, steady. "You can't fix disrespect, Daniel. You can only stop accepting it." In that moment, grief changed, didn't disappear. Grief never does, but it shifted into something clearer. A knowing, a decision forming. Not out of anger, not out of vengeance, out of self-respect. I exhaled slowly, the kind of long, tired breath that leaves the body carrying years of weight. And for the first time since the wedding, a thought settled into my mind with perfect clarity. I need to think, and I need to think very carefully. Because betrayal isn't just what happens to you. It's what it reveals about the path you've been walking. And as I sat there in the dimming light, I understood something essential. Some nights, I found myself whispering their names, not in anger, but in disbelief. I woke before sunrise the next morning, long before the neighborhood stirred. There's a particular stillness at that hour, a thin, almost sacred quiet, when a man can hear his own thoughts clearly. I needed that. I sat at the kitchen counter with a pen in my hand, tapping it lightly against the notepad. One tap at a time, steady, deliberate. Planning doesn't start with big ideas. It starts with truth. And the truth was simple. The Whitmans didn't respect me because they didn't understand who I really was. And my son didn't defend me because, well, he didn't understand either. Not anymore. The pain from that realization had settled, but it hadn't disappeared. It had hardened into something else. A quiet resolve. I flipped open the first page of the notepad and wrote a single sentence. Reclaim what I built. Not out of spite, not out of anger. Out of necessity. Because if life teaches you anything at my age, it's that dignity doesn't return on its own. You have to go get it. I took a slow breath and began outlining what that road would look like. First, the business. Everything tied back to that. The company I'd built with Laura, the company the Whitmans assumed I had no power in, the very foundation of their confidence. They had no idea that while they were polishing their image, I had been solidifying control. They never bothered reading the shareholder agreements. Charles was too busy maintaining appearances. I was too busy maintaining reality. That was the difference between us. I made a list of documents I needed to prepare. Ownership certificates, board approvals, the legal filings I'd updated quietly over the years. Every piece of paper was a brick in the structure I'd protected. And now it was time to show them the architecture. I flipped to a second page and wrote another line. Confrontation must be calm, not loud, not emotional, calm. People underestimate calmness. They don't see it coming. They think it means weakness until the ground shifts beneath them. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my thumb gently along my jaw, thinking about the title of the story. He called me a bitter old man, so I showed him who built his world. That phrase carried weight now. More weight than even I had expected. Around midday, I pulled out the old filing box from the hall closet, the one with Laura's handwriting on the lid, company records. Her neat cursive brought something soft to my chest. A memory of her humming while organizing receipts, always keeping our little world steady. I laid the papers across the kitchen table, one by one, like cards in a slow, precise game. By the time the sunlight shifted across the floor, I had every piece I needed. This wasn't revenge born from fury. It was a correction, a recalibration, bringing the truth to the surface where it belonged. Around 3 o'clock, I drafted an email to the board. Short, measured, polite. Requesting an early meeting Monday morning to review several urgent matters. Nothing more. They knew that tone. They knew it meant something was coming. But not what? Not yet. I paused halfway through typing, hands still above the keyboard, as another thought surfaced. Ethan. Before I moved against the Whitmans, I'd need clarity about my own son, not anger, clarity. Had I failed him somehow? Had I mistaken generosity for guidance? Or had he simply forgotten who stood behind him all these years? I didn't know, not fully. But I would. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The late afternoon breeze pushed gently through the maple trees, leaves flickering like tiny flags signaling the shift ahead. This was no longer about humiliation at a reception. This was about reclaiming the ground I had quietly ceded over the years. Piece by piece. In the name of love. In the name of family. But families change. Sometimes without warning, and a man must decide whether to shrink with it or rise. I went back to the table and stacked all the documents neatly. Straight edges, aligned corners, everything in order. Everything ready. Then I whispered to myself, the way Laura used to do before a big day. Stay steady, Dan, one step at a time. And with that, I placed the final page in its folder and closed it firmly. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait. And waiting, at my age, is something I've learned to master. I arrived early Monday morning, just as the sun began lifting itself over the skyline. That soft orange light stretched across the street, touching the windows of Whitman Holdings like a quiet warning. People say revenge is loud, dramatic, fiery. But real justice, the kind that lasts, comes in on soft feet. I carried the folder under my arm, the same folder I'd prepared so carefully at my kitchen table. The lobby receptionist greeted me politely, though her eyes widened a little when she saw the expression on my face. Age teaches you how to carry silence like a weapon. Upstairs, the boardroom felt colder than usual. High ceilings. Dark walnut table. Fresh coffee set out like nothing in the world was about to tilt. Charles Whitman stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, already anxious. He turned when he heard the door open. "Dan," he said, attempting a smile. "We weren't expecting you this early." I nodded, setting the folder at the head of the table. My seat, the one I usually took without ceremony, but today it meant something. One board member whispered to another, then both fell silent. They could feel something in the air too. A shift, a quiet storm. I took my time opening the folder, letting the rustle of paper echo in that heavy room. When I finally looked up, every eye was on me. "Before we begin," I said softly, "I want to thank each of you for being here." Polite, measured, unthreatening. Then I placed the first document in the center of the table. "As of last quarter," I continued, "I hold a 54% controlling interest in Whitman Holdings." The room went still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Charles blinked, confused at first, then terrified. "Dan, what are you talking about?" I slid the next document forward. Then another, and another. Ownership transfers, board approvals, old agreements rewritten years ago, quietly, legally, carefully. "Your father and I built this company together," I said. "He trusted me with his shares. I held them for his sake, and for your future. But somewhere along the way, Charles, your family forgot who helped build the floor you stand on." He swallowed hard. "You're doing this because of a wedding insult?" "No," I said, voice calm. "I'm doing this because your family believed respect was optional." A long breath left my chest. Not anger, not triumph, just truth. "And because my son's dignity, my dignity is worth more than your comfort." A board member cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Whitman, he's correct. These documents are valid." Charles looked at me the way a man looks at the ocean right before a wave breaks. "Dan, please, we can talk about this. Fix this quietly." I shook my head. "This is quiet." I opened another folder, the restructuring plan, the one I'd spent the weekend perfecting. Effective immediately. Salaries were tied to performance. Nepotism positions dissolved. Operations reorganized. Every corner of the company rebalanced. Charles's face drained as he read. "You're firing my nephew." "No," I corrected. "I'm eliminating a position he never should have held." He looked up slowly, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes, not sadness, but disbelief. "And my role," he whispered. "General manager," I said. "Your job will now be what it should have always been, running day-to-day operations, not treating this company like a family trophy." He closed his eyes. A long, painful breath trembled out of him. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. My power wasn't the papers on the table, it was the years of steady work behind them. The board voted, 6 in favor, 1 against. When it was done, I gathered the documents with the same care I'd opened them. Charles didn't move. He just whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why now?" I paused at the doorway. "Because, Charles, you called me a colleague for 30 years, but your daughter called me a hog in front of 200 people, and you laughed." A rustle swept through the room. "But that wasn't the real wound," I continued quietly. "The real wound was realizing my son thought that silence was acceptable." I stepped into the hall, the door clicking softly behind me. No triumph, no applause, just silence. And somewhere in that silence, I finally felt free. I sat on my porch the next morning, a fresh cup of coffee warming my hands, watching the sunlight ease its way across the yard. Funny thing about life, you don't notice how heavy the air has become until the weight finally lifts. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't hurt. It felt earned. I thought about everything that had happened. The wedding, the boardroom, the years of slipping respect, the moment when laughter at my expense became normal in the eyes of people who should have known better. I used to tell myself it wasn't worth making noise about. That family harmony was worth the swallow. That age required a man to let things go. But letting things go is not the same as losing yourself. I remembered the title of this story then. He called me a bitter old man, so I showed him who built his world. It echoed differently now, not as a threat, not as revenge. As truth, because bitterness wasn't what lived inside me. What lived there was memory sacrifice, the years of building something brick by brick, only to be treated like the dust beneath it. A man can survive many things, but quiet disrespect that eats at the edges of a life you work to make steady. And yet, I didn't want anger to be the last chapter. I didn't want my heart to harden in the shape of someone else's mistake. So after the board meeting, I reached out to Ethan. I told him I needed time, but I wasn't closing the door. I wasn't my anger, and I didn't want him to be his silence. Sometimes the only way to teach respect is to show where the line finally stands. And sometimes the only way to bring someone back is to let them see what life looks like without your steady hand holding theirs. The world feels different now, lighter, wiser, quieter in a way that doesn't sting. I've learned something in all this, something I wish I'd understood earlier. Respect, once lost, doesn't return through anger. It returns through truth, revealed slowly, calmly, at the moment when you finally stop carrying the weight for everyone else. And justice, real justice, isn't loud or fast or triumphant. It's the simple ability to sit with a cup of coffee on a quiet morning and breathe without anything pressing down on your chest. Maybe age doesn't steal our strength. Maybe it just teaches us the value of using it wisely. And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful thing a man can do is reclaim his place in a world he helped build. Not for pride, but for peace. That's the ending I like best. Not victory, but peace. If you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments. And if my story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed for more.